Hello there, everybody. Just good to see you today, and great. We're looking forward to a great conversation with a professional colleague that's based in the Houston, Texas area, Kay Nadel. So, Kay, I'd love to be able to start out with you telling us a little bit about what do you do professionally?
Hi, Mark. Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So professionally, I work in the talent management space. So predominantly looking after performance management, succession planning, career progression, or talent mobility as it's now dubbed. So that's kind of where I've been for, as well as learning and development. Been there for the last 10 or so years. And prior to that was part of HR, doing all HR business partner kind of work. So have a good view of many things, including performance management. So this is an exciting topic.
Okay, that's great. Wow. That's wonderful. I've got such a subject matter expert in front of me here. So how, just out of curiosity, Kay, how did you decide, because you become a little more focused on performance management, what was kind of that driving force to get you to, what was that intrigue or excitement to you to get you started in performance management as that focus area for you?
Actually, it's really interesting because performance management has always been something that I've been interested in, even when I was at university or college. Just the topic always interests me. How do we get better as individuals? How do we improve? And how does that have an impact on the business? So it's always been interesting. And when you go into the work environment and you see performance management in action, especially in the earlier years before it's changing, it wasn't exactly how I had anticipated it would be. Lots of individuals that don't particularly like it and don't want to do it. And all you hear is that's time consuming. I'm like, all right. So I got a lot of that. And I think when I moved into learning and development and started to actually really concentrate on learning, did I really understand the importance of performance management, and how it kind of links into career growth and all those pieces. So it's really become a focus point. It's really important whenever I'm in talent management. It's the first piece that we start with because everything else is hinged on it. So
Right.
that's kind of why it's just really important, and how I've kind of progressed that way. It's interesting
Yeah.
how time tells.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So when you think about it, so for anybody in the audience that really doesn't have a good definition for performance management, how would you, if you were going to be looking at a client opportunity and talking to them about performance management, how would you define performance management for those in our audience, just so they can get a professional definition of that?
I'm not quite sure about professional definition, but I'll give you a plain and simple definition of what I think it is.
That works too.
Performance performance management, individuals often just think it's performance reviews and the annual review, and that's the extent of performance management. But it's not. That's just a small piece of it. I think performance management is a cluster of functions that we do to grow and develop our employees in the business. It can consist of many things: continuous feedback, regular one-on-one conversations, coaching, goal setting, clarification of the expectations. It's career growth. It's all these pieces that we call performance management. And whether your company chooses to do an annual review or not, that's just one small piece of it. It's actually multiple pieces that we do over a course of a year throughout an employee's journey. So definition of performance management, there are multiple pieces that consist of performance management that you need to be thinking of as you go forward.
Right. Oh, that's great. And so it really, for organizations that you haven't worked with, that are, excuse me, but organizations that actually haven't done this before, because it has so many facets to it, where do you recommend is a good starting point in actually starting this journey of that performance management type of process?
I think the best place to kind of start is with your regular one-on-ones. Those are the start of many conversations. So building your managers to have a regular cadence, getting your employees involved, having them be empowered to drive and have those conversations with managers, I think is the first step. Once you've kind of built the cadence and they're having these conversations, it becomes easier to do feedback. It becomes easier to do coaching. It becomes easier to talk about goals. It just becomes easier as the conversations progress, it becomes easier. So I think that's the best place to start. The other thing is, if you haven't had any managers that do one-on-ones or have never done one-on-ones, then you might want to start with some training. So getting managers, what's best practice? What does a one-on-one look like? How do they have those conversations?
Right.
That's kind of where I would start.
Okay, that's great. So those one-on-one conversations, since you say those are so critical, what is so if I would assume you do quite a bit of training in this area, what would you say the key thing is that most managers actually don't get right about doing one-on-one conversations with their employees?
They don't have them. That's the first thing.
There you go. That's probably helpful if you start doing them, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing, is that I found managers that don't do them. That's the first little hiccup. And my advice to new managers is always just put it on the calendar, set up a regular cadence and stick to it. What you discuss, you'll get better at. Well,
Right.
there are things that you can do, but just get it on the calendar first. Get it on a regular cadence, get that moving, and don't ever cancel, right? Unless you absolutely have to. And that way you can show individuals that you're dedicated, it's their time, that you're not going to move them off the schedule because something else has come up that you need to take care of. Or if you do, that you explain, I'm going to move it for this week and it's tomorrow instead of today. But I think that's the first thing that managers really need to do, is build up that cadence, and then they can start talking about, start simple. I know managers just generally talk about work, but start there, right? But then start to build relationships, listen, ask about developmental opportunities that individuals are interested in. Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? Just getting started, I think, is a crucial step that managers take, and they just don't, because they're either scared or they feel like it's not something that is valuable to them and their time, but it really is. So it's to get them there.
What you mentioned too, while you're saying that, I was thinking, so you mentioned cadence is really important in keeping that cadence. So what do you recommend? Is that every 2 weeks, every month? What do you recommend for new organizations you're working with? What do you recommend that cadence to be in an ideal situation?
Depends. It depends on the manager, but I have found weekly is good. Though I do know that sometimes we have teams of managers that have more individuals that they could possibly fit in a week. So it becomes really difficult for them to have regular one-on-one conversations. So I tend to say every week, every second week, it would be great, right? If you have an individual who is, senior, that perhaps doesn't need a check-in every week, maybe make them every third week or so that you're still touching base with them, but they are a little more senior. You don't need to be hand-holding too much. But new hires, you have to meet with them every week, maybe even every day. Definitely has to be some sort of regular occurrence with new hires. Individuals that are new to the role, new to your team, they need to be on a more regular cadence. Individuals that are struggling, obviously more regular. So I'd say stick to about a week, maybe every second week, depending on how big your team is, but at least once a month, but no less than that.
Right. I love what you said there too, around with new employees, that new hires, the more frequent, the better with new hires. And that's something that in the work that I do, that's something we definitely, we look at that onboarding period as a 12-week period, and making sure that there's more frequency of meetings up front. And that's just so highly important. So I'm glad you kind of reaffirmed that. So how about, companies that are middle market size, let's say lower middle market to middle market size companies, 1,000 employees, 500 employees, in your experience with working with those size companies, how well do they do performance management, all those facets that you've described?
I actually don't think it has to do with the size of the company. I think it has to do with the process that you've chosen. So I've given you a couple of examples. I think it really depends on leadership. How vested are your leaders within a feedback culture with driving performance management? They need to walk the talk. They need to do those performance management
Mhm.
tools, they can't be sitting on the side not doing their one-on-ones. It matters. Like their managers see it, their individuals employees see it if they're not doing it, not practicing it. So it's really important that leaders do it, and then making sure that your managers and employees are vested. I think that's really important. Whether you're a large organization, small organization, middle, it doesn't matter. If you have those components, good process, leaders are ready to go, then it will be a successful process
Right.
regardless. So
Yeah,
I
that
think it doesn't matter about the size, just whether you have the right components.
okay. That's great. And I'd also say, what about how do you feel, because you have been, been doing this for a number of years? How do you feel around that? It's got to be, a question around, does it have to be leadership driven or does it have to be HR driven? What is your opinion there?
Actually, I believe that everyone owns it. So there's just certain pieces of it. HR is generally the individuals who make sure it happens,
Right.
gets it in place, puts the training in place. Leaders are the ones that support it. Managers are the ones that execute it. But ultimately, I think the employees drive it. They are the individuals that seek feedback. They are the individuals that want understanding of their goals, career growth. So I
Mhm.
think it's led a lot by employees. And I know that that's not common, but it needs to be. Like, how do you get managers and employees to drive the process together? And
Right.
that I think is really important, because if you're both vested in it, then you'll both make sure that it happens. And I
Right.
think that employees really want to be involved.
Yeah. No, that's great that you say that too. And I think, to me, in an organization now, that employees, I always I think about the employees in charge of their career, and it's really up to them that, if they're waiting for their manager, who maybe manages 10 people, to run their career, that
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you're one employee, the manager may have 5 employees, 10, 15 employees, they that work for them.
Yeah.
I always think about that too, that to your kind of reaffirming that, I think the employee really needs to drive that conversation and drive where their career is going.
Really, they do. And also just and I know it's scary, and that's part of where learning comes into it, right? Is that, and showing individuals what it looks like, but you need to be able to ask for feedback. What does that look like? Like, how do I get better? Don't wait for someone else to tell you what to do. Like
Hmm.
that's the one thing. Is like your manager could tell you, but you might be waiting for a while. Like you said,
Right.
15 employees, you might be, only scheduled every month. Ask, look at your career, get questions going. You're not sure, put all those pieces together. So I think it's really important that we empower our employees to do that. The
Hmm.
more information they have, the more documentation they have, the better. And
Right.
it alleviates the manager too. I mean, I think managers have just been, so it's you need to manage it, you do it, you push it. But I'm like, you don't have to work so hard. have
Yeah.
have your people do some stuff, right? Have them write the goals. Come back, is this what you want? Let's talk about it. Let's see if this works for the business. You don't have to work so hard as a manager. Just get people vested in the process with you.
Yeah. That is so great. I love that. I love what you just said there too. That, yeah, at the end of the day, who actually owns your career? Is that your boss or is it yourself? So, yeah. When it gets down to cadence, you talked about earlier about cadence of one-on-ones. What about a formal review where there's actually going to be written documentation and assessment? I know a lot of companies, and sometimes you cringe when you hear annually, but what is your recommendation? Annually, semi-annually, quarterly? What kind of recommendation do you have around the cadence of actually doing a formal type of review with an employee?
I think it depends on the organization, quite honestly. Like sometimes an annual review might work for them,
Mhm.
sometimes semi-annually, sometimes only once a month. But I've also been in organizations where you don't have a performance review. It is a summary of conversations that you've had over the last year.
Right.
So though it's still formal, but it's more of a wrap up that you have once a year. So that shouldn't really be as formal. It's just a blip. It's an extra conversation that we say, yay, we got to a point of this year. Let's sum up where we're at, and let's get ready for the next portion of the journey, I suppose. So I think it really depends on the organization, what works for them. It depends what fits. Like sometimes annually fits for people, sometimes it doesn't. I've worked with many sales organizations where they cringe if it's at the end of the year, because that's when they're wrapping up their last sales, and they're like, I don't want to get measured now.
Sure.
I'm still getting deals in, so it doesn't work for them. So
Yeah.
what, you got to kind of figure out what works the best, and how formal you want to make it. How maybe it's if you're doing quarterly, maybe it's not as formal until you have a final at the end of the year. So
Right.
I think it just really depends on the company.
No, that's great to hear. So it's interesting too, because when in the work that that my organization does, it's funny because I always think that managers who are going to give an employee a really negative review, they typically put those last. And then you ask them, why do you put those last? Well, I really haven't told them that they've been doing a bad job all year or the last 6 months, and then I just cringe. Right. And I'm sure you've seen that all the time. Well, if you were doing reviews like you recommend, it wouldn't be a surprise.
That's right. I call them no surprises. Like, you don't want to, a performance review should never, it should never be a surprise. And that's why I hinge so much on these one-on-one conversations, because it should never be a surprise. Isn't that dreadful? Like getting to a performance review and you get told like, hey, you weren't doing a good job for the last year, 6 months. You could have had all this time to improve, to develop, to grow, and you're only finding out a year later. How do you improve? I think it's such a disservice to employees to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why having these regular conversations where individuals feel safe to share feedback.
Sure.
It's okay to tell someone. It's actually easier to tell someone about a small thing when it happens than bulking it all up until the end of the year.
Right. Oh, that's so great to hear that too, because, and in some cases, it's actually a disservice to the employee, because if they don't have feedback, I always say, employees can be very good, but they're not psychic. They may not know that they're doing a bad job until you tell them and give them very specific feedback about what they're not doing correctly.
Yeah. And I've never had anyone say, oh gosh, that was terrible feedback. They're always like, oh, I didn't know. Or, you know what?
So true.
I wasn't sure. So thanks for pointing it out. So it's never gone as terribly as managers predicted would go. It's just that we just don't do it regularly. And I think that's why we should be having these regular conversations. You don't step onto a tennis court and just assume that you can play. You need to practice. So the same goes with feedback and regular conversations. You got to have them, because it builds muscle and you get better at it. And then you won't have those difficult end of year conversations, because it's a non-event. No surprises.
Right. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So do you have do you think that performance management, is it a system? Is it a process? Is it both? What are your thoughts there?
I suppose it could be both, though it's which comes first.
Mm-hmm.
I think is the question. And I would say the process comes first, because performance management you can do without a system. Google Docs, OneNote. As long as you're keeping track, everyone has access to it, and you're having meaningful conversations, I think that's more important than the system. What happens with the system is sometimes you buy it and it's not flexible enough for your process, or it hinders you from developing your performance management strategy further than what it is today. So I think be careful and wary of buying a system to implement performance management, because that limits you, and you need to be flexible. Mm-hmm. It changes, your business changes. You can't buy a system that works today that you can't change tomorrow, or you buy a system that does only annual reviews and there's no one-on-one conversations that you can record. Then you have this bifurcated process, and it just doesn't work for individuals. Managers and employees want it to be easy. Mm-hmm. Everything's easy these days. We have an app for everything. So it needs to be simple. I think, as HR individuals, if we're not thinking about keeping it simple, then we are hurting ourselves about getting it to work within the organization.
Yeah, that is so true. That's so true. Well, You know what? We're going to take a short break, Kay. So thank you so much. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back in a couple of minutes just to continue the conversation with the great conversation we're having with Kay Nadel. Thanks so much.
You want to grow your business, but people issues are getting in the way. Managing the people side of your business is complex and can feel overwhelming. Does this sound familiar? At HR Catalyst, people strategy is our business. We create and implement a people strategy with you so you can get back to growing your business. HR Catalyst was founded in 2013 with the goal of bringing the best-in-class HR practices to small and middle market companies. We are your outsourced strategic people experts. We help you solve the people issues in your business that are slowing you down. If you have HR concerns, you can schedule a complimentary call on our website at hrcatalystconsulting.com.
Okay, and we are going to start back with our conversation with Kay Nadel. And Kay, thank you so much for the conversation we've had thus far, about halfway through our chat today. And so what I wanted to do is ask you next, if you were, again, if anybody who's listening to this podcast or watching it, if they have not done anything regarding performance management before, what would you recommend as a subject matter expert in this area? What would you recommend as 3 to 5 things that are the key things they need to include in a performance management process for it to be successful?
Great. I think that's awesome. And I think we've already kind of been speaking about it. If you haven't noticed, one-on-ones is definitely one of the things you need to get in place. One-on-one conversations are key. You got to put those in place. Feedback, whether you're using a system to collect feedback from individuals or, making sure that individuals feel comfortable putting feedback into place or discussing feedback with peers and managers alike. That I think is very, very important. And then I think it's just taking away the scariness of performance management.
Sure.
Is letting individuals know that they're empowered to make these choices. They're empowered to talk about it. They don't have to wait for their managers. So I think communication is big too. I think if you're talking about it once a year, it's in one ear and out the other. It needs to be a constant thing. So if you're in HR or you're a leader, you need to be talking about regular conversations with individuals about, setting those goals, making sure that individuals close goals out. I think that's another thing, is that managers feel like goals are once a year things. They're not. They can be if that's there's no changes and that's what you're doing. But ultimately, business changes and things get put on our plate, taken off our plate,
Mhm.
and goals need to change all the time. So as a leader, you need to make sure that individuals understand that they need
Right.
to update their goals and
Right.
make sure that they're driving in the direction that you want them to be driving to.
Right.
I think those
That's
are
great.
important things.
That's great. No, thanks for that. So what about if you get the process going? Of course, there's a lot of excitement about getting this started. What happens? And I'm sure you found it in your experience. So what happens if that process gets derailed or starts failing? What are some things you can recommend that an organization do to get it back on track and get it back to where it needs to be?
I think first things first is to ask what happened. Like, why is it coming off the rails? Like, what is really happening? I think sometimes we're scared, or we think we know. Sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I've seen this happen before at a prior organization or company, and sometimes it just isn't. So we need to just ask, what is going on? Is it a subsection of a business that's coming off the rails? Is it everybody? Is it a certain piece of the process that's not working? Is it the system that's not working? Like, we really need to dig into what's not working, and then you can put in a solution. I think that's really important. And the way that you would do that is collect feedback, speak to managers, speak to leaders, speak to employees, find out what's not going well and what they don't like. So
Okay.
That's the best way.
Sure. That's great. That's great. I wanted to run with something you just said too, and you said a little bit earlier in our conversation before we took our break. So do you recommend that with all the systems and apps that are out there, do you recommend right up front that the organization needs to either purchase a specialty software for this, or use, if they're using an HRIS, HR information system platform that has performance management module in it, do you recommend that everything be embedded into a tool, a software tool that they have a standalone or are using an HRIS system? What are your thoughts there?
No, don't go buy a system
Okay.
without understanding your process first. And I think, but also people also need to explore what they have. So if you have a standing HRIS system, get with a vendor, see what it looks like and how it works,
Right.
and where you can make changes, because I think that's important, because sometimes, it's a standard, you only have an annual review, this is what it looks like, and this is the standard process. Ask what's coming down the roadmap. Like, are they including regular one-on-one conversations? Is that being integrated into your performance reviews? How do they integrate goals? So I think there's a lot of questions that you should be asking if you have a current vendor. Which direction are they taking performance management? Maybe it's just a side module. And then you may want to then think about, is this what you want to do for performance management, or should you consider a different system or a different app that you may use for performance management or any other talent management pieces? So I think there's a lot to consider when you look at systems. You don't just go out and buy one. Make sure that it works for you now and into the future. And then if you currently have one, take a look at what it's got and how much can you change.
Right. Okay, that's great. So if a business owner has been watching this podcast and they don't do performance management currently, they're still not convinced. What are 3 reasons they need to get started with this? Of course, I don't know when people are going to watch this, but they need to get started with it in the next, 1 to 2 months. At least start moving in that direction. What are 3 compelling reasons you would say that a business leader really needs to start putting this as a priority for their business?
I think, there are many articles out there that will tell you all kinds of things. And I think the obvious are engagement. Your individuals will be engaged, retention, uptick in culture. I think those are really, really important. But I think if you are a leader that really, truly believes in people and developing people, because people are the backbone of your organization, then I think you really need to look at performance management. Performance management is just one of those pieces. Without it, people don't know which direction they're rowing in. They don't know whether they're doing well or not. They don't know whether they have options at your organization. So with a performance management system, if you're having the right conversations, then individuals know they're guided, they're motivated to be there. They want to help you drive. They want to learn. They want to put what they're learning into practice. They want to grow with you. So I think all the problems that we've been having with individuals leaving because of career opportunities means growth opportunities. If we're not talking about it, if we're not sharing what you're good at and what you're not good at, and moving individuals in the direction that they're supposed to be going, then it's only a detriment in the long run. So the best start now. It's not hard to get started. It grows from there. It's a process, but the best way is just to get started. Get your managers talking, get your employees talking, capture that information, and then move from there.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Good for you. Now that's a really if that's a really, I don't want to say a sales pitch because it's not a sales pitch, but it's really for improving. There's so many facets about this that is really about, like you said, employee engagement. And employee engagement in most organizations is quite low for many reasons. So even just getting employee engagement in those and having those conversations with employees, we have to remember that employees are people, and having that conversation with those employees is going to be huge. So I'm going to stop right there, Kay, but thank you so much. I'm going to move over to a couple of fun things I want to ask you about, but thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. Great questions.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your just the really good insights you shared today. So we're just going to move over to a couple of quick hitting fun questions for you. So what are 3 books? They don't have to be on this topic, but they could be on other business related topics. But what are 3 books you would recommend that are a must read for people in our audience today?
I have just finished Impact Players by Liz Wiseman. So I like that. Clearly performance management. Who are your impact players? I think is really good. I do like The First 90 Days, which is by Michael Watkins. So I think if you're looking either starting a new job or starting to look at performance management in terms of growing new hires, then I think The First 90 Days is a really good book to go with. And then I always like Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. So anything that is opening about, and just funny enough, she says, unclear is unkind. So talking about performance management, if you're not clear, you're being unkind. So
Sure.
Go ahead and take a look. Those are my three that I really like.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm not sure if you're a podcast listener, but if you are, what are a couple current authors that you enjoy listening to their podcasts?
Brene Brown's one of them, but there
Yep.
are a couple of others. Like Brown Table Talk is really awesome. If you haven't done that, it's with Meta Malik and DC Marshall, and they're talking about awesome content about breaking down the challenges for women of color that they face in the workplace and providing
Interesting.
practical tips. So that's a great talk if you haven't listened to that. Converging Conversations is also great. It brings together people on many different topics, so that's also a good one to listen to. I also like Work Life with Adam Grant, just because he talks about all kinds of topics. Sometimes it's work related, mostly work related, and sometimes it's not. So I like a good mix.
Oh, that's great. So you're a very well-versed podcast listener, that's for sure. You've got some great ideas there, and some of the authors I have not heard of, so I've got to go check those out too. So,
Awesome.
Last question for you. So, given where you are today, what would you tell? What advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
I'd say stay the course. It's a fun and exciting ride. And when you get to college and they say you're going to do HR, don't go, what is that? It's all good.
Oh,
It's
that is
fun
so
and exciting.
funny. That is great. Stay the course. I love that. So that is awesome. So it's that is great. Well, I have truly enjoyed the conversation today, Kay. So how can people, if they're interested in having further conversations with you, how can people find you online?
LinkedIn. Just reach out on LinkedIn and we can chat.
Alrighty. So it's Kay and it's Nadel. So it's Nadal. So just so folks. Yeah, so that's great. So thank you so much, Kay, that it's been a really insightful conversation today. And I hope everybody who listened to this got some really good nuggets, because Kay shared a lot of great insights today about performance management and just the insights and just the facets of performance management, because it is a process and it's something that's somewhat of a cycle. And so if you don't do it now, if you haven't done it before, I hope you've heard a lot of compelling reasons today to get started sooner than later. So again, thank you so much for our audience. Thank you, Kay, for the opportunity to get a chance to chat with you today. And we'll look forward to catching up with our audience in a couple of months. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark.
Bye-bye. Bye.